What could be more unlikely than a slave's son becoming king of Rome? And yet, the Romans told a story of a child crowned by fire, chosen not by blood but by destiny. This was Servius Tullius, the king born in chains, and doomed to fall in betrayal. In the half-shadow of Rome's earliest days, long before the marble temples and the triumphal arches, the city was ruled by kings. They were not emperors yet, but warlords, priests, and symbols of destiny. Among them, one king stood apart, for he was said to have been born not from noble blood, but from bondage. This was Servius Tullius, the slave who became a king. His story begins with a woman of humble origin, a servant in the royal household. The chronicles called her Acrisia, a captive taken in war and bound to the service of the queen. From her womb came a child who bore no claim to throne or honor. Yet the gods marked him from his very first breath. On a night remembered in legend, the boy slept in his cradle, and a flame appeared above his head. It did not burn his hair nor harm his skin, but hovered like a crown of fire. The queen, Tanaquil, wife of King Tarquinius Priscus, saw this wonder. She did not fear it. She understood it as a sign, the child was chosen for greatness. Tanaquil, a woman famed for her skill in reading omens, persuaded her husband to raise the boy in the palace. Though born of a slave, Servius grew up as a prince in all but name. He studied the rituals of the gods, the laws of the people, and the arts of war. He was not only strong of body but sharp of mind, earning respect even from those who whispered of his birth. The people, too, began to notice him. When he rode through the streets with the royal household, men pointed and spoke of the fire that had crowned him in infancy. They said the gods had chosen him, as they once chose Romulus when the city was founded. Destiny clung to him, stronger than blood, stronger than chains. Servius himself never forgot where he came from. Though he dined among nobles and studied with priests, he carried within him the memory of slavery. He knew the weight of chains, the silence of submission, the fear of being forgotten. Perhaps it was this memory that later made him the king most concerned with the common people of Rome. But prophecy and destiny always carry danger. As Servius rose in stature, the shadows around him deepened. Enemies whispered that a slave's son could not be trusted with a crown. Others feared that his rise would mean the fall of their own power. Still, under the watchful eye of Queen Tanaquil, the boy of fire grew into a man of ambition. Step by step, the path toward kingship unfolded, a path paved not only with omens and favor, but with blood, betrayal, and fate. The years passed, and the boy marked by fire grew into a man of stature. He was no longer the silent child of a slave woman. Now he carried himself as one destined to rule. Yet destiny in Rome was never gentle, it demanded trials, blood, and sacrifice. King Tarquinius Priscus, fifth monarch of the city, grew older. He had conquered Etruscan towns, expanded Roman territory, and brought wealth to his people. But with power came envy. And envy in Rome often ended with blades. One day, while the king sat in his palace, assassins entered under false pretense. They were men hired by rivals, cloaked in the guise of petitioners. As they bent before him, they struck with axes. The king fell, his robes soaked, his voice silenced forever. The palace erupted in confusion. Servants screamed, guards clashed, and the news spread through the streets like wildfire. Rome had lost its king. The city trembled on the edge of chaos. Yet in that moment, one figure acted with iron resolve, Queen Tanaquil. She remembered the omen of the boy with flames above his head. She remembered the destiny promised by the gods. She would not let Rome fall into the hands of conspirators. Tanaquil addressed the people from a high balcony. Her voice, sharp as bronze, cut through the noise of the crowd. She declared that the king still lived, wounded but not dead. Until he recovered, a man of trust would rule in his name. That man was Servius Tullius. The boy of fire now stepped into the place of a king. Though born of a slave, he wore the purple robe. Though scorned by nobles, he carried the scepter. The city accepted him, at first in confusion, then in awe. He judged disputes, led ceremonies, and commanded respect. The people saw not a servant, but a ruler chosen by fate. And so Servius began to rule, even before the crown was his. The conspirators raged. This was not the outcome they had paid for. They had struck down a king, only to see another rise, one shielded by omens and the queen's cunning. Whispers of rebellion filled the alleys of Rome. Yet the common people, the humble farmers, craftsmen, and soldiers, grew loyal to him. Servius, unlike the kings before him, did not only dine with the nobles. He walked among the markets, listened to the voices of the poor, and offered judgment with fairness. The city began to call him protector, not just ruler. At last, when the truth of Tarquinius Priscus's death could no longer be hidden, Tanaquil revealed it. She declared that Rome could not remain leaderless. And so, by will of the people and favor of the gods, Servius Tullius was crowned king. The son of a slave now wore the royal diadem. The fire of prophecy had become reality. But in Rome, every crown carried a curse. The higher a man rose, the deeper the shadows that gathered at his feet. Servius Tullius was unlike the kings before him. He carried within him the memory of chains, and perhaps that shaped his vision. Where others ruled through conquest and fear, he sought to build order through law and structure. Rome under his hand became a city reshaped. The first great reform was of land and wealth. In earlier days, power in Rome lay with the few. Nobles claimed the richest fields, the widest pastures, the choicest spoils of war. The common people tilled the soil but saw little reward. Servius decreed a new order. He measured land, counted households, and demanded records. For the first time, Rome held a census, a reckoning of men, wealth, and arms. Each family was registered, each field recorded, each citizen marked. The census was more than a list. It was a mirror of society, dividing the city into classes by wealth. The rich bore greater burdens but also greater privilege. The poor carried less, but their voice was smaller in the councils of Rome. From this order sprang the centuries, the military divisions that would endure for centuries. The richest citizens stood in the front lines, armed with bronze shields and spears. Behind them, those of lesser means carried lighter gear. At the rear stood the poorest, with little more than stones and slings. Thus even the poor had a place, though humble. The city no longer fought as scattered tribes but as one army, ranked by duty and wealth. It was a system both fair and cruel, lifting some, binding others. Yet it gave Rome strength it had never known. Servius also reshaped the sacred heart of the city. He built the Great Wall of Rome, encircling the 7 hills. Stone by stone, the city was bound together as one. What had once been scattered villages became a single body, protected by a crown of walls. Temples rose too under his reign. He dedicated shrines to Fortuna, the goddess of fate, for he knew better than any man the power of destiny. He honored Diana on the Aventine Hill, making her temple a common sanctuary for the Latin peoples. Rome, once small, now claimed the loyalty of neighbors through faith as well as arms. The common folk blessed his name. He gave them voice in assemblies, a measure of dignity they had never known. He was still a king, but a king who remembered the lowly. For this, he was loved. Yet the nobles grumbled in their marble halls. They said he raised the poor too high, that he weakened the ancient order. They whispered that a man born of a slave had no right to shape Rome's destiny. Their envy grew sharper than daggers. Still, for many years, Servius reigned in peace. The city flourished, its fields yielded, its armies grew strong. Rome, under his reforms, became not only a city of war but of structure, law, and destiny. The boy of fire had truly become the builder king. But greatness breeds jealousy. And in Rome, jealousy was always armed. In the shadows, rivals stirred. And among them, one family plotted most deeply, the Tarquins, hungry to reclaim the throne. For many years Servius ruled in peace. His walls stood strong, his laws ordered the city, his reforms gave Rome new strength. But in the marble shadows of the palace, envy sharpened like a knife. It was envy carried by blood, the Tarquin family, who had once worn the crown. King Tarquinius Priscus had been slain, yet his descendants had not forgotten. Among them was Lucius Tarquinius, ambitious, ruthless, born with the hunger of kingship in his eyes. He had married one of Servius's daughters, but in his heart, he desired more than a wife. He desired a throne. Servius had 2 daughters, both named Tullia. One was gentle, modest, content to live quietly within the palace walls. The other was fierce, cunning, filled with fire. Her name, too, was Tullia, but history remembers her as the darker one. It was she who saw in Lucius Tarquinius a reflection of her own ambition. At first, each had been bound to the opposite in marriage. The mild Tullia was given to the violent Tarquin. The fierce Tullia was given to the gentle brother of Tarquin. But the gods do not favor harmony where ambition rages. Soon, tragedy struck. The gentle pair were cut down, whether by chance or by hidden hand, no one could say. And so the fierce Tullia wed Lucius Tarquinius, binding together 2 hearts of fire, cruelty, and greed. From that day, the palace trembled. Together, they plotted against the old king. Servius, though wise and beloved, was aged. His daughters should have been his support, but one became his doom. Each whisper, each counsel of mercy, was twisted into betrayal. Lucius Tarquinius began to gather allies among the nobles. He told them that Servius, born of a slave, had no rightful claim to rule. He said the reforms had lifted the poor too high, giving them voice that should belong only to the patricians. The words were poison, and poison spread quickly. Tullia, his wife, urged him on. She scorned her father's gentle rule, calling it weakness. She whispered in Lucius's ear at night, "Why serve, when you can rule? Why wait, when the throne is within reach?" Her hunger was sharper even than his. At last, the day came. Lucius Tarquinius entered the Senate house dressed in royal robes. He sat himself upon the king's throne, surrounded by armed men. When Servius came, unarmed and unsuspecting, he was confronted by his own son-in-law. The old king tried to speak. He reminded them of his reforms, of his justice, of the omens that crowned his life. But Lucius shouted him down. The senators, cowed by soldiers, turned their eyes away. Servius was seized, thrown down the steps of the Senate. He fell bleeding into the street, abandoned by those who had once sworn loyalty. And there, on the stones of Rome, he was struck down. The slave who became king ended not with honor, but with betrayal. Yet his death was not the end of horror. For his own daughter, Tullia, drove her chariot into the street. Seeing her father's body lying upon the stones, she did not halt. She urged the horses forward, and the wheels rolled over the corpse. The people gasped, some cried out, but none dared move. The image of Tullia spattered with dust, her chariot stained by her father's blood, burned itself into Rome's memory. The place where this happened was called Vicus Celeratus, the street of crime. Its name carried shame for centuries. Thus ended the reign of Servius Tullius. The boy of fire, the king of reforms, the protector of the lowly, was undone not by enemies abroad but by the ambition of his own blood. The throne passed into the hands of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, last king of Rome. And with him, the monarchy itself would soon be broken. Dawn over Rome came cold and pale. The banners on the Palatine hung without wind. In the great house of the kings, new footsteps echoed on old stone. Lucius Tarquinius had seized the throne, and with it, the city's breath. He called himself Superbus, the Proud. Titles in Rome were not always given by law. Sometimes they were given by memory. His name would become a warning. The first days of his rule moved quickly. Counselors of Servius were dismissed or vanished. Petitions from humble men went unanswered. The courts filled with fear, and the streets learned silence. Tarquinius held the fasces high. He believed power must stand above custom. He sat upon the seat of judgment with soldiers at his back. When he rose, few dared look him in the eye. He broke the bonds that Servius had woven. The friendly ties with Latin towns were strained. Allies became subjects, and subjects felt the iron of command. Pride closed the doors that kindness had once opened. Yet he understood spectacle. He planned a crown for the city, a temple on the Capitoline. The stones were hewn from the quarries, the foundations cut deep. He summoned workers from every hill, free and unfree alike. The site became a forest of scaffolds. Ox carts groaned up the slopes, leaving tracks in the clay. In the midday glare, masons hammered at tufa blocks. At night, pitch torches spat smoke under the new beams. Tarquinius stood often upon the rising platform. He liked the view of the Forum from that height. He liked the sense that Rome itself bent to his will. The city was a statue, and he its sculptor. But statues do not forget the chisel. Within the noble houses, old families measured their anger. They remembered Servius's gentle voice. They remembered the body on the stones. Abroad, he sought victories to clothe the throne. He marched against the Volsci and the Sabines. Rome's young men followed, hungry for pay and plunder. The standards moved like dark birds above the fields. In war, he showed the cold talent of command. He punished hesitation with public shame. He rewarded boldness when it served him. He brought home captives to walk in chains. The city saw triumphs, but not trust. Men cheered because cheers were counted. Women whispered in courtyards behind lattices. Old men shook their heads at the pace of change. Among the king's sons, ambition burned like oil. Sextus, the youngest, hid a restless hunger. Aruns watched with quieter eyes. Titus walked close to his father's shadow. There was a town called Gabii, standing stubborn beyond Rome's reach. The king besieged it and failed. Then he tried counsel where rams had broken. Sextus went there alone, pretending flight from his father's wrath. He played the exile with art. He won the trust of Gabii's men by gifts and courage. He led their soldiers to neat victories on the plain. He became the hand that opened their gate from within. When he sent a messenger asking how to proceed, the king said nothing. He walked his garden instead. He cut down the tallest poppies with a staff. The messenger returned with the image, and Sextus understood. He arranged the quiet deaths of the city's strongest. One by one, the poppies fell in Gabii. When the gate finally swung wide, there were few left to shout. Rome took the town without a cry. Power, once tasted, grows bold. The king's sons rode where they pleased. They entered villas uninvited, their laughter harder than bronze. The law watched from a distance and kept its cloak closed. In a camp far from Rome, a feast was held on a rainy night. Wine went round the fire, and young men bragged. They spoke of wives left behind, each praising his own house. Collatinus, kinsman to the king, named Lucretia. They rode to sea, to test a boast by speed. They found her at Ardea weaving by lamplight. Her maids moved like quiet shadows, bread still warm on the table. She greeted them with modest words and clear eyes. Days later, Sextus returned alone. He came at night when the household slept. He carried a threat sharper than his sword. And in the morning, a wound lay over a noble house that no water could wash away. Lucretia sent for her husband and for her father. When they came, she told them everything in few clean words. The room held its breath. Then she spoke the sentence she had set for herself. Rome would never forget that knife. The cry that followed traveled faster than any herald. It passed from threshold to threshold like flame in dry grass. It reached a man named Brutus, who had worn dullness like a mask. Brutus tore off the mask. He lifted the blood-stained dagger and the oath. He called the men of Rome to the forum. He told them the kings had broken the city's soul. They swore by the gods and by the memory of the wronged. They swore never again to suffer a king in Rome. The oath passed from mouth to mouth, from hand to hand. It became a chain stronger than iron. Tarquinius was with his army when the storm rose. He turned his chariots toward the city. He found the gates shut and the walls hard. Rome had decided without him. Sextus fled to Gabii, the town he had bled. Old debts waited there with drawn knives. Titus and Arun scattered to friends who suddenly had none. The wind that had filled their cloaks went still. In the forum, Brutus spoke beneath the rostra. He named the crime and the remedy. The monarchy was ended by vote and vow. 2 magistrates would rule for a year and no longer. The fasces were lowered and raised again under new hands. They belonged now not to a man but to an office. Law changed shape like molten bronze poured into a new mold. Rome stepped from kingship into the long road of a republic. They say that Brutus met the sons of a friend in a dark plot. They say he judged them as citizens, not as boys he had known. He did not look away when the sentence came. The city's birth cost iron and tears. The Capitoline temple was finished without the king who dreamed it. Jupiter's great house looked out over a city altered. Pilgrims climbed the steps with laurel and incense. They found a Rome that had taught itself to breathe again. On the slope where the wheels once crushed a father's body, dust still gathered. Mothers used the street's name to hush quarrelsome children. Vicus Celeratus held its warning like a cold stone in the sun. Memory worked there longer than any law. What became of Tarquinius the Proud? He knocked at Latin doors and found them cautious. He stood at Etruscan hearths and found them distant. A king can be heavy to host when his city has shut its gates. Battles would follow on fields where the Tiber bends. Standards would fall and rise again with the dawn. But the center had shifted, and the axis would not turn back. Rome had discovered the strength of saying no. And what of Servius Tullius, the child of fire? His laws remained in the bones of the city. His census still counted the burden and the right. His walls still held the 7 hills in a single embrace. Men spoke his name softly in years to come. They remembered the boy crowned by harmless flame. They remembered the king who measured men not only by birth. They remembered how pride had rolled its chariot where piety should have walked. In the markets, old men pointed with knotted hands. They told children that Rome must be guarded first within. They said a city is not its stones but its oaths. They said a crown sits safest when no head wears it too long. So ended the age of the kings. The river went on, patient as time. Goats grazed under the new temple's shadow. And the forum learned a different music in its stones. From that day, power in Rome walked on 2 feet, not 1. It carried term limits like a shield. It learned to fear the crowd and to listen to it. It learned that memory is the strongest magistrate of all. If you walk those hills in later centuries, you still hear it. The scrape of wheels where they never should have gone. The quiet voice of a king who counted men instead of merely commanding them. And the iron oath that turned a city from night toward a more careful dawn. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next videos.